Hello, welcome to this edition of the umgoblue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with.
Clint Derringer.
I think it's been as good as we could have possibly hoped for. Love our staff. The players have embraced them. The players have bought in, and it's just a good vibe in the building right now. And the players really believe in what we're doing schematically and process-wise. And like I said many months ago, these guys are eager and hungry and willing to work, and that hasn't changed in 8 months.
We're going to close out fall camp for the Wolverines. Well, Clint, it's been an interesting camp. We've gotten to hear a lot from the new coaches and the players on the team. What's your general feeling at this point?
I think I'm glad the energy is high. I'm glad there's a lot of positivity coming out of the building. It seems like, a lot of different players, different position groups have been represented. Gotten to talk to almost the whole coaching staff at some point or another, and to me, it sounds like they're all pulling in the same direction. No major issues that we've heard of or major question marks to be dealing with. So all of that is really, I think, in terms of camp, from what we can see from the outside, that's you're hoping to avoid any major bad news. And so far, so good on that front. And just kind of continuing to build some enthusiasm heading into the opener against Western.
So, my impression overall is that there's a lot of weight off this team. And, there was a lot of um, uncertainty heading into spring, with the new coaching staff. I definitely get the impression that there's a comfort level. They know what they're getting from these coaches. They know how they're going to be treated. They know what the expectations are. And, in the light of all the things that were happening off the field last season, it seems like that whatever layer was there, that's gone, right? And, thankfully they're focused on football now. So, when you think about everything that this team's gone through in the last 9 months or so, definitely it's nice to just be talking about football again. And again, really excited to, I think one of the things that I've been really happy so far is that we haven't had any major injuries, right? And, it's kind of like when you go through the spring and you play the spring game, the only thing that can happen is something bad. You're not going to see anything that's going to, blow your socks off. You're not going to win any games in the spring, but, you can't have an injury. You can lose somebody. And thankfully that didn't happen. And that's how I feel about where we are as fall camp begins to wind down. And, that's good. Um, so, Clint, your specialty is in breaking down the defense and in doing the SP plus and the statistics, as far as how Michigan's going to match up against, opponents. You've been doing these stats for a while. What is your impression of defensive coordinator Jay Hill and the schemes he's trying to install?
Well, I like that Jay Hill is aggressive, not in the traditional defensive sense of blitzing a lot of guys necessarily, but aggressive in that he wants to create confusion in order to create mistakes and create havoc to try to get the ball back. I think all defensive coordinators, of course, are focused on creating turnovers in their own way. But I like um, a coordinator that is going to try to create a lot of confusion for the quarterback and then attack at the right moment and maybe disguise where you're coming from. And I think that not only is that kind of my favorite, profile, I would say, for a defensive coordinator, but also I think it fits this particular team and Michigan's defense this year really well because they have a ton of experience in the secondary where you can mask and disguise coverages and communicate uh, cleanly and then probably start communicating even non-verbally. And we saw that so clearly in 2022 and then especially in 2023. Um, under Jesse Minter, and really saw it emerge under Mike McDonald also in 2021. So I like that we're kind of returning to that profile of being very, very multiple in our fronts and disguising coverages and trying to create confusion for the quarterback to slow him down. And eventually, the goal is to certainly create big plays and create turnovers. And they've got the guys at the edge that can really win one on ones, maybe command extra attention from the blockers, and maybe create opportunities for other guys in the middle. So I really, really think that the defense right now may be a touch underrated. Um, and I'm excited to see what they can do when they get to some of the stronger offenses on the schedule. And they don't have that really high flying offense that they need to deal with until later in the season.
One thing that I really like about Jay Hill, you know, as a defensive coordinator, he just has a confidence. And, I say it, he has head coach energy, even though he's a defensive coordinator. He is high intensity, high confidence. And what's interesting is that when you talk to the defensive players, that confidence flows down to them. And we've spoke on the podcast, and it's been true for, multiple seasons now, that Michigan's defense has been elite. And I think when we had the change in coaching staff, okay, and let's look back at last year, right? We had Bryce come in at quarterback, and we had pieces moving around in the offense. But the thing that really held the team together under Sharon's first 2 years was the defense. And my concern when he left is that we were somehow going to have a complete reset on the defensive side of the ball, and we were going to lose um, that thing that you could bank on. Okay, and what I'm getting from talking to the players and from talking to Jay Hill, and he's mentioned it. He's like, listen, I have watched the Michigan defense from afar and have admired it, right? So it's interesting that you have somebody who I think is definitely going to add his own different spin to it. But there's the desire for the defense to be the cornerstone of this team. And, one thing that I thought was interesting is, okay, so first, the things that you hear from many defenses.
Flying around and fast, um, covering up any mistakes. If something happens, a little bit of a misalignment or someone gets reached out of a gap or something, you want to see the intensity of how we pursue the football, just kind of cover up for those things. I think how we do it in the first game is much more important than what we do. But I expect us to be out there and physical and dominant and executing. Um, no defensive coordinator wants to go into game one and have excuses as to why you're making a bunch of mistakes or not running the football. So I expect us to be sharp and, playing the way that the fans expect us to play.
And then you even heard that echoed by Rod Moore.
I can tell you our defense is going, like I said, it's going to be physical, fast defense. Trying not to give up any points. That's the main thing because the defense wins championships. Be the best defense in the country, and the past 2 or 3 years, the best defense in the country won the national championship. So that's really what we're honing on. The main thing that we strive for is to be the best defense.
Which is good to hear because he's seen a lot of defenses when he's been here, and he's even been called a coach on the field. So when he says that they want to be fast and physical, he knows what that means, right? But one of the interesting things for me was when we had Jay Hill basically say, some of the statistics and metrics that he's looking at.
We have a plan to win, and the plan to win is to play great defense. And our pillars off of that are going to be how we defend the run. That's where the 85 yards comes up. Having a goal for pass efficiency defense, which if you're going to be elite, you need to be under 100. And then turnovers and sacks, we want a combination of 7 turnovers and sacks each game. So if we're hitting those numbers, we're pretty dang good. And there's other things too that we emphasize, but those would be probably the things that I talk about the most.
Clint, what do you think about that from an analytics standpoint?
I like that he's got a method that he believes in what the difference between elite and good and mediocre and bad is. I think that is really the value in analytics is kind of understanding you want to be and setting a goal or how you want to attack or whatever it is. It's kind of drawing where the lines are, where you kind of flip from maybe one tier to the next tier, and that's how you can keep pushing your guys even when they are having success. For example, in the early season run up here, you've got a couple games against lower tier opponents, a MAC opponent, and then UTEP is kind of a bottom feeder right now. You want to be able to set goals that the elite teams, quote unquote, are going to perform at this level. Sure, we did well on the scoreboard, and that's the only statistic that really matters is the scoreboard. But when you're breaking down film and trying to give guys some of the minor details or very, very specific items that they need to work on, I like that you've got the analytics framework for exactly where we need to improve, whether it's creating turnovers and sacks, again, havoc rate, or if it's execution on a certain down, if they kind of waned in the second quarter or the third quarter, whatever. I think all of that is really important because it shows from a coaching staff to the players that you're constantly looking to help them improve and ultimately to help the team improve.
So what I like is, so we have the SP plus, we have the stats that everybody can see, right? But what I like about him throwing that 7 number down is we know what they're tracking, okay? And one of the first things I thought when I heard that is, okay, you know what? I can see us looking to that stat at every game. Like, did we get to 7? Okay. And then following up with him and saying, okay, I mean, it's interesting because when I heard 7, I'm like, well, okay, you're not going to get 7 turnovers. Okay. I mean, very rarely, right? But 7 turnovers plus sacks. Okay, I can see that, but that's also a pretty, a high goal. So what I'm thinking is, hey, listen, if that's your goal, is that the mean? Is that the goal that, hey, we're striving toward it, but we realize we might get 4 or 5? Or is this defense set up that, yeah, we're expecting 7? So I'm really looking to see how that evolves over the season. And, we've talked a lot about how the strength of this team is the defensive line and the edge rushers. And it'll be interesting how often they can beat that number or how many games it takes to get to that number. So I really thought it was interesting for him to throw that down. And it was very organic. It definitely, I sense that there's a whiteboard or multiple whiteboards in Schembechler Hall that have that written down and that has been communicated to the defense. And that's one of the things they're going to strive for.
Yeah, and for me personally, as I've looked, I finally get all of the analytics and get to look at my own numbers year over year, and I try to kind of keep some of those tidbits in our group chats, and then to bring to the podcast here. I know the thing that drove me crazy the last 2 years under Wink Martindale on defense was third down conversions. It seemed like they would be really, really great on first down and second down, and then there would be some kind of communication bust or a bad call or just a missed tackle, missed execution, missed coverage, whatever on third down to where we gave up. It seemed like a ridiculously high number. So I looked back in the last 10 years as my tracking the stats here now for 10 years. And the third down conversion rate last year under Wink Martindale was 38% against this defense. And the year before that was 41%. And the only year that is worse than that in the last 10 years was the COVID year that totally went sideways and got Don Brown fired. So the worst 2 seasons of third down conversion rate were the last 2 years, going all the way back. The best year, by the way, still 2016. They only gave up 22% conversion on third down that year. It was just, if you found yourself in third down against that particular Don Brown defense, you were in big trouble. And then fourth down conversion, obviously even more critical. The opportunity to create a turnover. They've averaged 50% over the last 10 years. It's been basically a coin flip on fourth down conversion. But last year, 65% conversion rate for offenses against this defense. 65% of the time, 2 out of every 3 times you went for it on fourth down, you converted against Michigan. That right there sums it up. That's where the defense just wasn't quite good at in some of the games to move off of 9 wins into the 10 or 11 wins. But when you and I were sitting there watching, it felt very often that really the defense was doing mostly what they needed to do, and that the offense and special teams kind of let them down. But compared to what we've seen in the national championship run and then all the way back to the beginning of the Harbaugh era, the defense just took a step back under Wink Martindale. And I look forward to kind of getting back to those elite numbers. And I'm really, really glad to hear Jay Hill, regardless of whether the same numbers that I look at or not, I'm just glad that he's looking to really push the envelope and get back to a top tier defense. This team can do it.
Clint, the thing that was really, well, okay, there were multiple things that were frustrating about the defense last year. Is you had the impression watching that you almost, as soon as you got the third or fourth down, you expected bad things to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
what was bad is we're not talking about them converting 3rd and 1. We're not talking about them converting 4th and short, right? They would convert on 3rd and long. And I think that was one of the most infuriating things is the defense would be so close multiple games to just, ringing up an incredible stop and pinning them back, right? And
Mm-hmm.
being in a position where putting the offense in a great place, right? And it wasn't just converting on third and fourth down. It was converting on third and fourth down long. That was just, makes you want to just, throw things. So I think that's what I remember. And when I was going back and watching the tape from the last season, it's just, oh yeah, wait a minute, we're in a great position. Oh no, we're not. It's third and long. Wait, it's almost like you don't want to see third and long because that's when the defense would come up short. So again, definitely interesting to see something different because we were seeing that rinse and repeat for the 2 seasons under Wink Martindale.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to find the specific play, but I remember it was the USC game. There was a 3rd and at least 20, and I want to say it was 3rd and 25 that USC converted on a run play. And I literally wanted to throw. I'm glad there was nothing in my hand. I definitely would have thrown whatever it was. So I had to kind of get up, take a walk, and take a couple deep breaths at that particular moment. That was the microcosm of it for me, and I'm sure that you and I talked about it via text at that moment. That it can't be that way. It cannot be that way where you're giving up third down conversions on run plays on 3rd and 20.
Well, I will tell you, Clint, I was at that game, and after that play, person next to me was, of USC, and they were just like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing!" And I'm like, "No, that's been us all year." Okay, and not only do I remember that play, but I remember how disheartened the Michigan defense was after that game when the players came out. You're used to going to post game press conferences, and it was one of the shortest, most abrupt, one word answers. They were livid, and you could just see that. We always talk about that the players care more than anybody. Okay, the fans
Mhm.
get upset, but the people who really care are the people who are putting, the time in year round. Their careers are on the line, their sweat and their tears. And after that game, it was one of the most brutal press conferences I've ever seen. And yeah, it was just that play, definitely, stood out. Um,
I found it. It was the first drive of the second half for the defense. Third down and 26 from the USC 32. They gave up a 49-yard run to the backup running back, King Miller.
yeah, yeah, good times, good times. I had, and you're sitting, yeah. So again, it's the, yeah. Moving on. And hopefully we will not see that again anytime soon. But I do remember it, and it was nasty. So all right. So Clint, I'm gonna put you on the spot here a little bit. One of the things that Jay Hill told us was his the way he's going to break out the positions.
Our base defense will have 4 DBs and 3 linebackers, 3 D linemen.
After listening to that statement, um, there's a player short, and I remember thinking it at the time. And when you're sitting there and you hear it in real time, I always assume that I missed something, right? I always assume it's me, and I'm like, well, I must not have been paying attention. Maybe right before this, he talked about where that other player would be. And, when I mentioned it to you, you said the same thing. You're like, that's only 10 guys accounted for. So, having pondered this for, a few days here, uh, where do you think that other player is accounted for? What position do you think it's going to show up as?
Well, I don't know. I don't know why it ended up a player short. My best theory, when we talked about it, my best theory as to what happened is when he was talking about 3 linemen, he's talking about interior guys, 3 guys rotating for 2 spots. Um, as opposed to, I don't think that he's going to play a predominantly 3-man front. I don't think this is going to be a 3-3-5 or a 3-4 defense. So that's my best guess, is that the 2 edge guys were not mentioned there. So then if you put 2 edge positions into what he ran down there, it makes a little bit more sense. And then the extra guy actually is probably 3 linemen for the 2 interior tackle positions. But I don't know. That's my best guess. I couldn't tell you. The other spot that kind of flexes, especially with personnel, and it goes with being multiple. There's always kind of a hybrid space player. Think of guys like Dax Hill and Jabril Peppers. Previously, Chris Bracey, the transfer safety from Memphis, he is really, really good against the run. I could see him sneaking down into the box very frequently, or maybe even being a hybrid space player and technically a linebacker, depending on how you classify him. But I think he probably spends most of his time thinking run first as opposed maybe to pass first, depending on the front and the down and distance, et cetera. But if we're just talking standard defense on first down, I could see Chris Bracey acting more like a linebacker than a true safety. So those are my 2 thoughts on kind of where that guy is, or where there's flex that kind of goes into what Jay Hill said there. But it's still, you still have 3 corners, for 2 spots as well. I think Zeke Berry's probably the 3rd corner on this team. Smith Snowden, who's a transfer from Utah, was such a dynamic athlete that he got a lot of touches on offense last year for the Utes. So he's going to be right in the mix at corner. And Jair Hill is as close to a shutdown corner as we've had these last couple of years under Wink Martindale. So you got 3 corners. Probably one of those guys plays nickel. Nickel tends to be kind of a hybrid space player as well. So we'll see. I think that there's a lot of complexity into what they're going to try to do, and hopefully they have smart enough guys in the right spots to to still be able to play fast and look very confusing, but it is actually very simple for our guys to get lined up and then fly to the ball.
Well, I was puzzled, and I fully easily admit that defense isn't my thing, right? I really have to I struggle to keep up with it and track where everybody's going. So, what I struggle with is when we look at these position groups on the defensive side of the ball, the um, question mark, if we're not going to say weakness, let's say question mark, is
Mm-hmm,
in the linebacker space, right?
mm-hmm,
And,
mm-hmm.
you mentioned how much it hurts that Cole Sullivan isn't going to be returning, left. So, one of the things that Coach Whittingham mentioned was,
We're not going to do a depth chart. I guess they haven't done one here for 20 years. Is that right, Dave? So we'll let Western figure that out on the first snap. Hate depth charts.
You do?
Hate
Do
them.
you really think
Despise
that
them.
gives an advantage?
It's a pain in the rear, and it also causes some, the players, what, why am I, it's just better just to go about our business and let the other team figure out who's playing. After one game, they'll all figure it out. So, yeah.
It's good.
But
It's a Michigan tradition.
is it? Well, I'm right in line with that. Right in line with that.
when I heard Jay Hill talk about where the player mix, I'm like, well, maybe he's trying to not reveal anything, right? But it sure sounded weird to me at the time. And again, what I struggle with when he says, we're going to have three linebackers, I'm like, well, like I said, I question that, right? I mean, not that we're going to have three, but I don't know who that's going to be. And that's the place that I would attack, right? Like, I feel really good up front. I feel really good in the defensive backfield, or at least I know who's going to be there. I do have, I kind of feel like we're mushy in the middle, or at least, if not mushy, like I said, there's a mystery there in the middle, and I'm really interested to see, um, you know, we have, when you hear that seven number, right, that tells me that they're going to be really aggressive up front. And he's talked about, packaging different kinds of blitzes and doing kinds, exotic things with people rushing from the corner. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of interesting packages to pressure opposing quarterbacks. But again, my question is, okay, if they squirt out, um, where does that leave the middle? So that's my question. How do you feel about how they stack up at linebacker right now?
Yeah, it makes me nervous. And in a previous podcast, it does feel like there's kind of a bubble in the middle where we have some question marks at defensive tackle, those interior positions. Um, I think the top two guys are strong, but I think it gets thin a little bit quicker at those interior positions. And then linebacker is a total question mark to me. I think right now the most reliable player is probably the transfer from North Dakota State. I know Bowles has. I think they kind of acknowledge that he's going to be the guy that's getting the defensive calls into his helmet, the green dot, sticker on his helmet, so he'll get the call. So that would kind of imply that he is, responsible for understanding kind of all three levels of the defense and getting the calls in and getting guys lined up if they're so. And then everybody else they've got is young and has almost no experience. So that doesn't mean that they can't be good. Certainly Cole Sullivan stepped in with no experience and really played well as a young guy. So, I like the talent level. I like the recruiting rankings that we've seen at the linebacker position, but it does feel to me like that could be kind of an Achilles heel for this defense. And, that's what I'll be looking at as we kind of go game by game. Do I think that the offense across the field can exploit a bubble in the middle of the defense for a full 60 minutes, enough to put enough points on the board and win a game and outscore Michigan? And that I still don't see a lot of offenses on the schedule that are going to be able to do that, even if it is kind of comparatively the weakness of the defense there in the middle. So we'll see how it shakes out. Could be better than we anticipate, but when there are moments this season that we get frustrated, I do think it will be because of not be able to kind of stand up tall on some interior runs and in probably in big moments.
Well, Coach Whittingham has mentioned and spoken in other outlets and in different availabilities about how there's a question about how much depth this team has. And the area that screams to me a lack of depth is at linebacker. And, he hasn't come out and said it. He's very vague. He doesn't say a lot. And not that you'd expect any coach to say, where you should attack us is right here. But that's what I'm feeling when he says that is I look at the different position groups and where they've been able to bring players in, and linebacker is where there's a lot of questions. So we'll definitely have to see how that stacks up moving forward. So moving to the offensive side of the ball, uh, obviously, I think the number one question that people have and the number one focal point is, quarterback Bryce Underwood. And, Clint, one thing that I have noticed since spring and, heading into as fall camp closes here is Coach Whittingham would say Bryce is our number one, right? And it was kind of just, in the spring, it was just put out there, right? And he would go on and on about other players, and he would say, yeah, Bryce is quarterback. And I kind of questioned that. I was kind of surprised. But what we're seeing in fall camp is that, you know, Coach Whittingham has great things to say about him. And, I think that's important not only to make us feel good, but also to show Bryce that his coach has his back.
And Bryce is an outstanding athlete as far as being coachable and being, a student of the game um, and just really work ethic. I mean, he's the whole package in that regard, without a doubt. Great attitude, team captain. You know. First of all, his grasp of the offense overall. I think that's the thing that is allowing him to play faster, and grasping the offense has allowed him to speed everything up. His clock in head is working faster. He's making really good decisions. He's taking good care of the football, and he has just been on an upward trajectory all fall camp, and has really started to come into his own. Don't want to get too ahead of things because we still got 2 weeks before we play, and a lot of work to do between now and then.
Yeah, the quarterback is the most important position in the sport, and it's arguably the most important position in any sport, probably save pitching in baseball. But the quarterback really determines what your ceiling is, and definitely determines what your floor is. And we can tell just looking back over the last 5 years since the COVID season, the quarterback really determined what the entire shape of the season was. The 2021 season, Cade McNamara executed pretty well, pretty cleanly. J.J. McCarthy as a freshman was kind of a change of pace guy, came in and had mostly a quarterback run game that he brought with him. And that offense really could make plays and definitely stepped up in some key moments. And then as J.J. McCarthy emerges in 22 and 23, obviously the team, takes off and is in the clouds. And then the opposite of that in 2024, where they have Alex Orji to start and don't have the ability or the willingness or both to put in that quarterback run package that almost had to be put in there for Alex Orji. And then when he can't execute the passing game that is being designed, then they went to Davis Warren, and Davis Warren was slightly better than average just on passing. And by that moment, there was no semblance of a true passing game. Everything was had to be schemed open because there was just nobody winning one-on-one plays, including the quarterback. And then Bryce Underwood comes in as a true freshman last year, straight out of high school. And unfortunately, the system is slightly better in 25 under Chip Lindsey. But they're still not utilizing the quarterback run game to kind of open things up. And that's a strength of Bryce's. And when he's in the pocket, as we've seen and you've heard me kind of reiterate a couple times, he is not comfortable and he gets happy feet. He's either diving out of the pocket, throwing on the run, making it hard on himself, or kind of breaking down his fundamentals and hurting his accuracy from inside the pocket. So all of that is tied to, the quarterback is almost directly correlated to the success of each offensive unit over the last 5 years, and seen the highest highs and the lowest lows. And the good news is all of the conversation about Bryce Underwood post spring game through fall camp is exactly what we needed to hear. That fundamentals of how to be a pocket passer, calming down his feet. And we've heard Beck talk about wanting to utilize quarterback run game. They were one of the most prolific run game offenses in the nation last year at Utah. And it's because they utilized the quarterback in the run game. So all of the major gaps that we saw with Bryce Underwood in 2025 seem like they have been addressed, and I expect to see improvement not only right away in game 1, but I expect game 5 to be better than game 1, and I expect game 12 to be better than game 5. So I'm really, really excited for how they've addressed those major gaps. And it starts with they hired a quarterback coach to actually coach the number 1 quarterback recruit in the country instead of just throwing him out there, see how it works out, and then heap praise on him regardless of whether he played well or not. So I have very, very high hopes for Bryce Underwood as an individual, and I think that portends well for Michigan's offense and for the whole team.
You mentioned that they hired a quarterback coach for him, and we talked to quarterback coach Coy Detmer, and he was very evasive in answering any questions about how much work he had to do when he came in. And you could tell he was prepped to deflect, but it'll be interesting to hear, in future years, and for us to see how much of a change that matters. You mentioned offensive coordinator, Jason Beck, and you know he loves his running quarterback.
I've had a pretty good running quarterback for quite a while now. Going way back to when I was at BYU, we were in the get the best quarterback and play to their strengths, and so we had Taysom Hill, who was like the poster child of that, and then we had total pocket passers as the backup, and so we were able to just switch immediately between the two styles as something happened or if something happened. But with having the preference of what can we recruit and can we do, I love a guy that can be a weapon with his legs in the run game. Now he still has to do the other thing at a high level, to throw the football and score points and win. But to have a threat with everything that way I definitely prefer it.
It's interesting because one of the consistent things that we're hearing from multiple coaches and multiple players is that Bryce is getting a grasp of the offense and he's playing faster.
In terms of like today, I think was practice 13. Like Bryce has had 13 good practices. I mean, he's just working hard, consistent. There's not these big ups and downs. In the spring, there were kind of some highs and some lows. It was a little more up and down, not in terms of work ethic and effort. He shows up every day with work ethic and effort, but just in terms of the results of the play. And he's had 13 good practices. He's been really steady. Tons to improve. It's hard to give an A+, just in terms of, I just remember the negatives. That's all that stands out is the questions you get wrong. But he's had a nice camp and is doing a nice job.
They're basically working to, you know, mold this offense, around Bryce.
Yeah, well, just his general footwork overall has definitely improved. Now, will it stay improved when things are live and he hasn't been hit all fall camp, nor will he be hit until the first game. Hopefully, he doesn't get hit much in that game, but you can definitely see improvement. And really, the biggest thing I see is stepping into his throws. He was a little skittish early on, throwing off the back foot and kind of leaning back. He's really doing a good job of climbing the pocket, stepping into his throws, and much better with his delivery mechanics as well as his feet and better decision making, like I said. And Jason's doing a really nice job of morphing the offense to what Bryce does best.
And I don't think that they would be doing that if they didn't have confidence in him. Now, again, we're hearing a lot about how he has better footwork, but one of the things that Beck said.
And so whenever you start playing and bullets become live and real and all that, there's always an element of you're going to revert to, I don't know what the word is, but the subconscious, just whatever you're doing without thinking. Um, and he's been really, anyway, so he's made nice strides. We'll continue to emphasize it and play to his strengths and put him in the best situations to be successful.
For me, I think that's one of the biggest questions that we have about Bryce right now is, you're not getting hit for real in fall camp. You're not getting hit for real in spring camp. So, he went from, they were joking about, Coach Whittingham was joking about last season on tape, watching him running for his life, right? And Bryce, when asked about that, was pretty evasive.
Did you think you were running for your life last year?
Not necessarily.
But we could see that, right? I mean, you can just watch it on tape. So the question is, okay, how much better is the offensive line? I do think it's better, but it's good to, it's easy to look good when you're not getting hit. And I think that that's one of the big questions is how stout is the offensive line going to be? You know, but there's one thing that is clear, okay, is that Bryce is, universally respected. You have, running back Jordan Marshall talking about how the team trusts him.
I wasn't doing that my freshman year, so I couldn't tell you the pressures that he faced, but I know it was heavy. And for him to be able to hit a reset button, and he knows he's good enough. I promise you that. And everybody on this football team trusts that he's good enough and seen that he's good enough, or he wouldn't be in the position he is in. And he comes in every single day and works no matter what everyone's saying about him, no matter any of the bull crap that is talked about him. He comes in here every single day, and he's the same person every single day. And quite honestly, that's somebody that I look up to because I'm like, you're strong. Like, you're someone who comes in here and just works. No matter what people are saying, you ignore it. You come in here and work, and you just trust in yourself. You trust in God. And that's all you can want from a person is to have that trust and that feeling like, wow, you're a strong dude. Like, and I commend him for that, and I'm excited to see what he's going to put on tape this year and all the good things he's going to do for our program this year. And being a captain is not only leading, but it's also learning from each other. And I think we learn from each other every single day. We find out maybe a weakness I have or he has, and we try to build that up or focus on that to make sure that when it gets to that time that he can do all the things he wants to do. And I think the biggest thing that I've seen with him is he's so much calmer and patient, and he knows sometimes it might be on him, but he takes accountability for it. And then also he's so much patient and he's calm. When we're in the huddle, he's calm. I'm like, "You good?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm great." And that's the biggest thing you want from your quarterback is that confidence that we always talk about that he has, and he just has it. He has that swagger that a quarterback needs.
It's clear that Bryce is evolving as a leader, that not only does he have the confidence, but he has the confidence of his teammates. And I think that we're seeing the coaching staff kind of molding the offense around him. because he's a leader, right? And as well as he played last year, again, he was a freshman. And, he led by his play on the field, but I really didn't have the perception that he was a leader in the huddle and in the locker room. And it definitely seems to me that he's great.
Yeah, I mean that is great to hear. It's great to feel that kind of coming off of the different offensive coaches for sure, especially Kyle Whittingham. Where he did not immediately jump in with effusive praise of anybody, but especially of Bryce Underwood, to the point that in the spring it was circling about whether there were question marks at quarterback. But I think Bryce Underwood responded, and now we're seeing the staff kind of rally around him and support him. And again, like you said, hopefully the biggest difference this year on offense compared to the last couple seasons and even maybe the last 5 seasons, as good as they were, Michigan just has not been good at molding an offense to adapt to the personnel that they have available. Harbaugh was definitely going to make his offensive system work, and it did work. They did grind people into dust and had that kind of boa constrictor mentality on offense, and rode that all the way to a national championship. But I'm old enough to remember you and I doing a podcast after the Rose Bowl against Alabama, and we were so frustrated with their lack of execution and efficiency on offense in that game. And they made the big plays that they needed to down the stretch, thank goodness. But that offensive showing coming down the stretch in 2023 was had me kind of white knuckling it for sure. So I like hearing that a coaching staff is going to fit the offense to the personnel. The most important person on that offense is Bryce Underwood. He gives you the ability to do anything that you want to do. So if this staff is kind of handcuffed in any way, it's because of their own doing. It is not because of some limitation of the quarterback, and that is it's an empowering place to be for a play caller, and I'm excited to see what they can do with that, especially in the early season here, where I think they're going to get some opportunities to see what some younger guys can do, what some other skill position guys can do, and how they can play with the running offense with Bryce Underwood carrying the ball probably anywhere between 5 or 8 times a game.
So one of the things that really solidified my perception of Bryce is, you have this quote from Rod Moore, and Rod Moore has seen some great quarterbacks. He's seen some really good teams, and he saw some teams that really struggled when he was on the sideline injured, right?
This is leadership skills. Like he's vocal. Having Jordan right next to him, both of them go hand in hand. But his talent speaks for itself, and just the progression and um, the steps that he's taken to be a leader. He got challenged to do that when Coach Witt first got here, because quarterback is really the leader of the team. So um, he got challenged to do that, and he accepted the challenge.
And where have you seen him grow since
Everywhere,
spring?
everywhere, mentally, physically. Um, his decision making everywhere. He's been, you know, taking a lot of steps.
And coming from somebody like Rod, it means a lot. So the thing that I'm interested in is, as we close up the quarterback talk, is you're hearing from the coaching staff, but that they're really looking to press it downfield. Okay. Now, I get the impression, we used to talk about balance, like a 50-50 balance between running and passing. I don't know if we're going to see that. Okay. My perception is we're going to see running more than passing, but it's going to be running to set up the pass. It's going to be where they're not afraid. And I think a lot of it is as we talk about position groups, right? You know, we're expecting the quarterback play to elevate. I think we're expecting the offensive line to elevate from last season. But one of the areas that may have one of the biggest improvements is at wide receiver, right? And it's interesting, between Marsh and J.J. Buchanan, we may have two explosive receivers where, we did not have that the last few seasons. We did not, the wide receiver position seemed to be almost an afterthought.
Yeah, 100%. And to go from where we were last year with Marsh emerging late in the season as your, 1B with Donovan McCulley, you know, neither one of those guys would be 1A or 1B this year, right? The Marsh of last year is not going to hold a candle to the Marsh of this year, right? That leap that you see from true freshman to second year player is giant, but it's really really pronounced at the wide receiver position. Physically, they're just physically more stronger, can handle the physical components of the game, getting off jams at the line, and then also the route running and understanding of the offense and where they need to be is going to take a big leap. You've doubled now your time on task with the quarterback Bryce Underwood. So I really expect huge things out of those top two guys. And it's a really interesting kind of an open competition for the third guy. Some true freshmen coming in are highly touted, highly talented, and a couple transfers and previous 4 and 5 star recruits that are coming from other big name programs are all competing to be the third guy. And you have to think with those two headliners on the outside, there's going to be some space where defenses aren't paying attention to that third guy to the level that they need to. So definitely going to be some opportunities to make some big plays because this offense is still going to lean very heavily on the run. That's what Beck does. The running back room is probably the best in the conference, even if they haven't been recognized as such yet. I think that they will be by the end of the season. And when Michigan decides to throw the ball, I think they're going to be kind of going for the jugular and really trying to take big bites out of the defense. And that is something that's going to be fun to watch because I think we're going to see guys with nobody around them. I really expect to see some plays where both the scheme and the execution come together, and guys are wide open and scoring touchdowns.
And you mentioned that Michigan is going to be really solid at the running back position. You have Jordan Marshall back, and he just exudes confidence. You have the superstar recruit Savion Hyder in, and people have been raving about him. So it's going to be interesting to see. One position that I have questions that has been solid for Michigan for 4 or 5 seasons is actually at tight end. Like I have questions at tight end, but I feel so good about the running game, and I feel so good about where we are at wide receiver, which I have not felt good about in a few seasons. That you know you have the opportunity for a tight end to emerge. So it's interesting because you talked about how you're expecting the running game to be featured. One of the interesting things I'm looking for is they've talked a lot about this rhino formation where they bring in an extra offensive lineman who's not necessarily an offensive lineman, right? Could be an extra tight end. It could be an extra person from the defensive side of the ball. And we've heard a few names bounced around, but it seems like it's not going to be just whoever is the sixth offensive lineman. It sounds like they have a distinctive profile for what they want from that position, and I'm really excited about that. Being the football geek, whenever I see something that's kind of an exotic or an unusual formation, they talked about during the spring that they ran that formation last year at their last stop more than anybody else in the country. So I think we're going to see it a fair amount. And I'm really interested to see what kind of exotic plays that they can do out of it, because I don't think it will be exclusively a running formation. I think that's what they're going to want to signal to the opposing defenses. But I think we're going to see some some interesting things from that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. That was going to be my response to the questions about tight end is that if there are questions about the tight end, then I think they'll just lean even harder on that Rhino sixth offensive line personnel grouping. So I don't have any major concerns there. I think they're going to find interesting ways to run the ball, and they're going to play off of that and take some big in the passing game. And the the depth at running back again, I think eventually they're going to be recognized the best in the conference. Savion Hyder, people are comparing him to some of the best incoming true freshman college running backs ever. I don't want to, start doing that until we've at least seen him play and play well against some really good defenses. But I like to hear all that positivity for sure. The bar is about as high as it can be for a freshman running back. That's for sure. But the things that matter the most for this offense in terms of the running game are Jim Harding, the offensive line coach, is going to be a mammoth improvement in how the offensive line executes over what we've seen the last couple of years. I mean, for multiple reasons, he has a proven track record, and watching what he did at Utah last year and watching the discipline that offensive line, especially on RPOs, which are really tough for linemen more than anybody else because you can't go too far down the field with the ball still in the quarterback's hand. So there's a sense of timing, and watching them execute on some of those RPOs really shows that they knew what they were doing, that they drilled it as part of a system with the quarterback. And I really look forward to seeing what this comes together under Jim Harding. And then the other thing that helps the running game, we've already mentioned it, but just adding a quarterback run makes the defense defend every blade of grass on the field. You have to defend sideline to sideline and from the line of scrimmage all the way to the goal line. And that, I know you've heard me say it multiple times over the last few years, but I have a feeling this year that finally the Michigan offense is going to threaten the defense from sideline to sideline and from line of scrimmage all the way to the goal line. And that is what will create bigger seams, bigger gaps, and some more explosive plays.
Well, Clint, I totally agree with you on that. And I think back to, you've talked about years where, Michigan had different guys at quarterback, right? And I think about specifically when we had questions about whether Michigan could complete passes, far downfield, right? And you and I would be in the press box and I would say, hey, listen, just run a play and throw it 60 yards just to show them that they have to worry about it, right? And I feel in a very similar way about having a running quarterback, right? Except Bryce can run, right? Where in many defensive schemes, they don't have to account for the quarterback. Now you have to account for the quarterback. Bryce will be running, okay? And now I hope he doesn't run all that often, but I hope that they show it, right? And, one of the things that I'm always concerned about is, when I'm looking from the defensive side of the ball and I see a running quarterback, I say, great, light him up, right? Within the boundaries of the rules, right? But I mean, I love the opportunity to kind of put hit points on a quarterback, right? Try to wear him out, right? So I hope he doesn't run a lot, but he can run. And, if he were to run 4 times a game, we like to break things down by quarters here. If he runs once a quarter, I'm happy just to show them that they can do it, that they have to account for it, that they have to worry about it. That's going to put so much more pressure on opposing defenses and give opportunities for Andrew Marsh and JJ Buchanan to get open downfield. So, again, I'm super excited about potentially what we're going to see from this offense. And believe it or not, as excited as I am about the offense, we need to talk about special teams. I think we're going to see the biggest improvement in special teams than even offense and defense. Okay. Just because our special teams play has been so horrible the last 2 years. So with Kerry Combs coming in, and the coaches have talked about that you're going to be seeing some starters at key positions. We may see Andrew Marsh returning the ball. We're going to see special teams um, not only not hurt, but hopefully create some real advantages by putting the offense in a better field position.
Yeah, I will be tracking this pretty closely through the first quarter of the season. I want to see how the net punting stacks up in both directions, how we're helping the defense when we choose to punt, and then how we are putting our offense in good position on the return games for sure. I think the field goal kicker, we've been pretty fortunate to have great field goal kickers in the recent history. And Zabata last year just had an off year compared to where he was in 2024. He just missed some that were kind of surprising. And you know, I don't think that was anything physical. I think that was something between his ears and likely had something to do with the lack of focus and discipline in the rest of the program as well. So it sounds like the new transfer kicker came in from Pitt. He is pretty consistent and reliable, but not quite the strength of leg yet. He's still young. He's a second-year player, but anything inside of 45 yards sounds like he's really accurate. And that just means it kind of changes your calculus for what you're doing on third down calls and fourth down calls in the middle of the field, right? What's punting territory, what's four down territory, and what's field goal territory. So we will see. And then I like also the punter came in is an Aussie style punter. And the main reason that I like that, I mean, I'm fine either way, but the punter is that delay from snap to actually booting the ball away lets your coverage team down the field. You give up way fewer returns, not just return yards, but because of those extra second and a half of time for your coverage team to get down the field, it creates a lot more fair catches or just downed punts. So regardless of how accurate he is actually kicking the ball, I think the number of returns against our punt team is going to go down, and that's a good thing. It's one less explosive play that can happen against you. So I agree with you. It's going to be a big jump because the last two seasons have been a debacle on special teams. This year, medium, even average for the country would be good, and I expect them to be better than that. I expect Michigan to be in the top third and maybe even pushing towards the top 25, depending on whether they can create some explosive plays of their own in the return game.
Well, Clint, I don't want to hear this negative talk about having to punt and kick field goals. I'm very disturbed by your lack of faith. But if it comes down to that, so anyway, yeah, definitely. Man, the kicking game last year, and like you said, after Michigan having just a run of great, field goal threats last year was just added to the disappointment of other things. So, all right, so it's time to get out our crystal ball and look at season predictions. The way too early season predictions where we have not seen anything on the field, but we do our best. Um, One of the things that when I look at this schedule, okay, it's brutal. It is just a gauntlet, and I Rod Moore talked about it.
I have it on my phone screen, and I have um, maybe about 8 of the games. I have a money bag next to it, and it tells me those are the games that you got to perform in, and the team has to win, and the team has to perform great and to do what we set out to do. So, I mean, it's a whole bunch of opportunity for us to go be great, and I just can't wait. We start off with Western Michigan, and then it's a big one week 2, and then after that. So
Definitely a brutal season. So, as we do, we're going to break it down by quarter. All right, Clint. So, first quarter, Western Michigan, Oklahoma Sooners, UTEP Miners. How do you feel about Michigan's chances after those 3 games? How do you feel about those 3?
Oh, we'll get into some more detail in all of our pregame stuff for sure. I'll go unit by unit then. But Western's a solid MAC team. They won the MAC last year, and their quarterback comes back. So if Michigan is out of sync, could be problematic. But I think they're going to hit the ground running on both sides of the ball. I see them winning, by 3 or 4 scores against Western. UTEP is pretty bad at all the positions. It's your typical kind of bottom feeder program that you see in the non-conference. As long as Michigan is still healthy, hitting on all cylinders, they're going to take care of business against UTEP. The question is whether UTEP gets on the board at all. So in the middle there, obviously, is the home game against Oklahoma. I'm actually encouraged by this game because last year Michigan played so poorly, and still had multiple chances to win that game. And it shifted the conversation around Bryce Underwood, right? That's when Sharon Moore coached that game and then started his suspension the week after. And that's Bill Poggi said, yeah, I don't know. We didn't give the ball to Bryce, and I think we just need to let him take it more for offense. So I think that Michigan is probably a point or 2 better than Oklahoma on a neutral field, and this one's not a neutral field. This one's going to be the full Big House experience. SP Plus actually has Oklahoma rated by a point better than Michigan on a neutral field, but they usually swing 2.5 points for home field advantage. So this is basically a coin flip, and I am going to pick Michigan to win that game against Oklahoma early in the season. Goes against kind of my typical assumptions, because usually I expect Michigan to start slow and ramp up through the season. But I think they're helped this year by the new staff coming in and Oklahoma not having a full kind of vault of tape of what Michigan is under Jason Beck on offense and what they are under Jay Hill on defense. They will only have one real game to scout. So I like Michigan's chances at home against Oklahoma in a close one.
So, Western Michigan Broncos, bright lights, big house, 7:30 game. I think Michigan comes out and wins that one. I want to say easily 2 or 3 touchdowns. Little bit of hiccups because it's the first game of the year. I'm really surprised that the Oklahoma game is a noon game. Now, don't get me wrong. I love noon games. Okay, that is how God intended football. Okay, toe meets leather at noon. I'd be happy with that all year long. But I am surprised that's a noon game. I was at Oklahoma and it was brutal. And I really feel that if there's any game that Bryce Underwood has circled in his mental prep, it's Oklahoma. Because as you said, last year it was at Oklahoma, being able to be down on the field and seeing Bryce up close. It it's one of the first times I've seen a freshman player and just said, "Wow, you are a man among men." Right? Just an incredible athlete, and he was just so misused in that game, Clint. Again, frustrating to be there and to see the opportunities that Michigan had. So again, I am with you. I think Michigan squeaks out, maybe even a touchdown win in that game. And UTEP, that's going to be a glorified scrimmage for Michigan. So after the first quarter of the season, I have Michigan 3-0. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, yep.
All right, and so second quarter, we got Iowa, we got a road game at Minnesota, we got a bye week, and then we have the Nittany Lions of Penn State heading to the Big House. So, how do you feel about those 3, Clint?
Well, this is really there's 4 really, really tough games, I think, on the schedule, Oklahoma being kind of the 4th and the other 3 coming later. But these 3 games in the second quarter, Iowa, Minnesota, Penn State, will determine whether Michigan has a mediocre season, a good season, or a great season. Like this is what we talked about with Jay Hill and kind of seeing where the line is between good and great. This is it right here. Iowa right now in SP Plus, Michigan has a 17-point rating, right? Which, that's um, basically it's the offensive rating minus the defensive rating. Let's just simplify it for that. Okay. So 17 points, that's Michigan's rating. Iowa's 14.6, Penn State 16.2, and then Minnesota is only 6.2, but that's your first road game of the season. So I personally think that this is where they really have to go through the crucible and prove that they're not just an okay team or a good team. If they want to be pushing for a playoff berth, if they want to be fixing things and getting from, you know, B minus, B plus grades to A and A plus grades, this is where it's got to happen. And so Iowa at home, again, Iowa still has the same tendencies that they always have had. They're going to be very, very solid on defense and special teams. Offense is still challenged, although not quite as challenged as it was under Ferentz's kid. I think they'll win by about a touchdown. I've got it right now, 28-20 against Iowa. That first road game at Minnesota, it's not an easy trip for sure. It's an outdoor stadium also, and it's before the bye week, so probably dealing with some early season fatigue and probably guys getting dinged up and hopefully nobody hurt too bad. But also Minnesota is the kind of team, if you remember what we talked about on defense, Minnesota is the kind of team that can exploit where we said that bubble on the inside of the defense. So if Michigan hasn't figured out the depth at defensive tackle and linebacker, they could be in trouble on the road against Minnesota. Right now, I'm predicting Michigan to win, probably closer than we all would like. I've got 27-21. Michigan wins at Minnesota. And then coming out of the bye, Penn State at home. Again, I think that they're going to take care of business. It's still first year head coach over there. Matt Campbell coming from Iowa State, Rocco Beck following him. So I think that they're going to be better than what you would expect for a team under a first year coach, similar to Michigan. Penn State is the opposite of this year. They've got the easiest schedule, and this is one of the only games that they've got to get ready for. They've got the whiteout, probably against, I think they've get Oregon at the whiteout. And if it's not Oregon, then it's Ohio State. And the other game they got to get up for is this one. And that's it. They got 10 other pretty much just take care of business games. So we're going to get Penn State's best shot. I expect Michigan to win, but it would not shock me at all if any one of these games gets dropped if Michigan doesn't play well. For the Penn State game right now, I'm looking at maybe 27-17. I'm a little bit happy that that game is coming out of the bye week.
So I hate Iowa. Iowa has ruined my day more times than I would like to say historically. I always like to say, my very first Michigan game that I ever went to, Iowa ruined by a score of 9-7. The 7 points coming by a touchdown from Anthony Carter. But again, so my first game ever at the Big House, Michigan lost to Iowa. So I hate them. And basically, even though that was many years ago, it feels like the same Iowa team. Michigan could win this game 3-2 with that high explosive, high flying Iowa offense that has never existed. Now, all joking aside, I think that Michigan is going to take care of Iowa, but I do think it's going to be a slog. It's going to be one of those traditional, boring Big Ten slug outs and slug matches. So we will see that. I wouldn't be surprised to see if that is like a 20-13 or a 20-17 Michigan win. Then head into the road game, first road game of the season versus the Minnesota Gophers. Wouldn't be surprised to see that be a night game. It's early in October, not expecting the weather to be a huge factor, but I think that Michigan will be in a good position to win this game. I'm going to call this one 27-23. A tight road game, but I think Michigan's going to handle business. And I do feel that with Michigan having the bye week before Penn State, I think they're going to be in a pretty good position to win a squeaker versus Penn State at home. You know, I will call that, 28-20. Okay. And again, uh, Penn State doesn't have a very difficult schedule, but I, they've had a lot of player defections. They have a new coaching staff coming in, and we'll see how quickly they can put things together. So heading into halftime of the season, I have Michigan undefeated. I think you have Michigan undefeated. Do you agree?
Yeah, 6-0.
All right. Now, here's where the bad news comes from my perspective. I think that is a 6-0 mirage. And not that it's not 6-0 will be great, but you really have the tests coming up. You have the murderer's row heading into the third quarter. So, third quarter, we have the Indiana Hoosiers visiting Michigan Stadium. Then we have a road game at Rutgers. And then we have the Spartans heading into Michigan Stadium. So, Clint, how do you feel about that game versus Indiana?
Well, not quite a coin flip. I think there's probably a little bit of a lean. Agrees. There's a lean toward Indiana on this. They are still very, very tough. Signetti was able to bring in key transfers, especially at the quarterback position, outside, and the defense is still going to be very, very good. So they're the defending national, you know, widely considered to be pretty close to a lock to get back into the playoff and see if they can win some more big games under Kurt Signetti. I want to look at their schedule real quick so you can kind of get an idea of where they're going to be. They start with North Texas, then they play Howard, then they play Western Kentucky, then they get Northwestern, then Rutgers, then Nebraska. That's going to be 5-0 with not much challenge to speak of. A 6-0 with not much challenge to speak of. And then on the 17th, the week before Michigan, they got to play the Buckeyes. So after hiding anything that they want to do, they're going to pull out the kitchen sink to try to beat Ohio State at home. And then we get them the very next week. So I do think that Michigan will have a really, really great game plan for Indiana. I think that it's going to be a great game. Right now, in the prediction business, I think Indiana has fewer question marks. So I'm going to pick them to win the game. But it's going to come down to the fourth quarter and who can execute. And that is the game that Bryce Underwood needs to step forward and show that he's not a kid anymore. So right now, I'm saying 31-24, Indiana beats Michigan. But that is going to come down to a handful of plays in the fourth quarter. Rutgers, Halloween night on the road, could get pretty crazy. Rutgers defense somehow all of a sudden is bad and their offense is all of a sudden good. That's strange, but I think Michigan will take care of business. They're going to get back into the 30s on the scoreboard. I'm going to say 34-24. They beat Rutgers. And then the Spartans coming into Michigan Stadium for their Super Bowl. Basically the same team as Rutgers. Talent level, SP plus rating, all right around the same for Rutgers and Michigan State. They are either the 15th or 16th highest rated team in the Big Ten. So if Michigan plays cleanly, fear of losing in that game. Strange things happen. So Halloween on the East Coast and then coming back to go against the Spartans in Pat Fitzgerald's debut definitely has some horror story fear attached to it. But if Michigan plays well, they'll win over the Spartans by 3 scores. I'm going to say 37-20 right now. So they drop one against Indiana, but kind of bounce back, beat the other 2 teams that they should beat. And after 3 quarters of the season, I've got them at 8-1.
All right. Well, so I feel bad saying this, but I see Indiana as Michigan's first loss of the season. And it really comes down to that I think Indiana is a national champion with the biggest chip on their shoulder that I've ever seen. And I think that when I look at the experience they're bringing back, and, we've talked about some of the areas where Michigan has question marks, I expect Indiana by that point to be exploiting, how do we put this, chinks in Michigan's defensive armor. So I feel bad because I actually feel pretty secure in this that it's going to be like a 27-20 victory for Indiana. And I just feel that they're going to come in and take care of business. I don't want to see it, but my gut tells me whenever I look at teams, I like to take the labels off and just look at, player for player, unit per unit. And the label I can't take off is, they've had 2 seasons where they were much better than I ever thought they could be. And I see them, they've built a machine, right? So I'm expecting the machine to still be running. And, I would love to be wrong, right? Um, Michigan heads on the road to Rutgers. Again, that's going to be Halloween. I've heard that it's a zoo, so I'm looking forward to seeing that atmosphere. But I think Michigan's gonna basically pull out a tight one, and just tight because, again, coming off a tough loss to Indiana, I see Michigan winning like 20-10. Kind of another grinding game, but I think Michigan's going to pull it out. The last game of this third quarter, Michigan State. Ugh, you know, I feel like this is going to be an interesting litmus test for Coach Whittingham and his staff, right? They have downplayed the bitterness of some of Michigan's rivals, okay? And most specifically Ohio State. But hey, I got news for you. Uh, you know, Ohio State's a bitter rival. Michigan State is also a really bitter rival. And I think nationally people recognize Ohio State, but here in the great state of Michigan, we appreciate that Michigan State is pretty bitter. And, it would be interesting. That Pat Fitzgerald, understands the rivalry. He's seen it from afar. It'll be interesting to see what can happen. I think Michigan, if you go player for player, Michigan should win this one, 35-20. But so I'm going to say Michigan's going to be 1-3 in this third quarter, and they're going to have one loss heading into the fourth quarter. But I do have questions about that Michigan State game. So Clint, we both have Michigan having one loss heading into the fourth quarter of the season. Fourth quarter begins with a road trip to Oregon, followed by a home game to UCLA, and then season ends with a road trip down to the horseshoe of Ohio State, the Ohio State University, playing the Buckeyes. How do you feel about these last three?
Well, this next road trip to Oregon is the third road game out of 4, right? So a lot of home cooking this year for Michigan. Minnesota, Rutgers, the previous examples are just not environment that you're going to see at Autzen against Oregon. And then when you actually look at the teams, again, take the labels off. And Oregon right now is a really, really popular pick to win the national title. They have a vibes of that 2023 Michigan team when they all decided they were going to come back in the offseason prior, and including the quarterback Dante Moore. I think that we're going to get a peek at what the top of the mountain looks like, and if things don't go well, if Michigan isn't sharp after a tough West Coast travel itinerary, this might look kind of like that Orange Bowl against Georgia, where Michigan's a good team, but that team across the field is a different tier. And I think Oregon probably wins this one convincingly. I'm going to say 33-14. However, it's not a foregone conclusion. I'm not saying that Michigan cannot win, especially because they may cause a lot of trouble for Oregon on the outside. They may be able to create some big plays on defense and turnovers. And if you can do that, then you've got a chance to win any game. So go out there and have a chance to win when the ball kicks off. But I think Oregon is a level above what Michigan has right now. So I see losing that one. Returning home against UCLA. Now UCLA gets to make the cross country trip. A little bit difficult for them. I'm interested to see what they are under their new head coach. He comes over from SMU, which was a playoff program. So I don't really know what to expect from UCLA, but I expect Michigan to win that game. Could be a nail biter if Michigan is kind of keeping things under wraps in their pocket, preparing for the game, and also could be kind of licking their wounds coming back from Eugene. So this game could be a little closer than expected. Right now, I'm looking at like 30-14. But UCLA, that score could definitely get revised when we get to game week. And then to finish the season in Columbus, all the secrets are out of the bag. I think both teams will know exactly who the other one is. This one's going to be, just like I mentioned against Indiana, I think it'll come down to who can make the plays in the fourth quarter. I give a little bit of an edge to Ohio State, mostly because I think they are the other team besides Minnesota and Oregon that can kind of exploit that bubble in the middle of Michigan's defense. I think Bo Jackson can run the ball, and I don't remember how many years running, something like 22 years in the game. Whoever has run for more yardage has won the game. So that's what it'll boil down to. And Michigan's offense will be capable of winning that battle for sure. But Ohio State's defense in the middle a little bit better than I like Michigan's defense in the middle. So I've got Michigan finishing at 9-3, with their 3 losses coming to 3 shoe-in playoff teams from the Big Ten.
So I have Michigan heading out to Oregon and seeing the truth, right? And that's nothing against Michigan, but I think that there's just two different levels. I'm really interested to see Oregon. I have plans to go out for that game, but I struggle because I really think Oregon's gonna drop the hammer. So I hope I'm wrong, but I'm expecting Oregon to win by 2 or 3 touchdowns. Um, the problem I have with UCLA, okay, is I think you're going to be coming back, as you said, licking wounds from Oregon. There's going to be as much as you don't want to, you're going to be looking ahead, okay, and I honestly think that Michigan might struggle and may drop that UCLA game, okay. So that puts Michigan with 3 losses heading into the game, and you know everything is on that game, right? If Michigan finishes with 3 losses and beats Ohio State, they probably make the college football playoffs. Um, they probably don't make the Big Ten championship game, but that's okay. I can live with that. Um, and again, anytime you go down to Columbus, you hope that at that point, Michigan's been bruised by the Oregon game and has, girded their loins and have, going to stand up and be ready to face Ohio State. Um, I think it's going to be a very tough test for Michigan in Ohio State. I'll just leave that there. I never want to predict Michigan losing the game because we've seen all kinds of things happen, but I think that's going to be a real tough go. And I hope they can pull it out. But, I see Michigan right on the edge of 3 or 4 losses this season. And 3 losses is a really good year. 4 losses or more. And again, this is a tough schedule. We've talked about games that could go either way here. But, we always talk about, breaking the season up in quarters. And I think this fourth quarter for Michigan, these last 3 games, one of the things that I question, I question the coaching staff. I question the number of players that we've had come over from Utah, is that a Big Ten schedule is different from a Utah schedule. Okay. Again, Rod Moore says there's 8 money games, right? You didn't have 8 money games at Utah. I think that what is going to be the test is How are you in these last 3 games? How are you injury wise? What kind of resiliency do you have? We hear a lot of talk about Michigan strength and conditioning. Well, this is when they need to show it, and this is when I need to see it because I have not seen it yet with this coaching staff or some of these key players. And I really feel that you know fourth quarter will be the test. We'll know what we have, and obviously, but I'm saying I see a lot of things that I have concerns about. Like if you take the labels off, it's like, ooh, yeah, this schedule. These coaches haven't seen a schedule like this. Some of these players haven't seen a schedule like this. Welcome to the Big Ten. It's different here. Okay, it is different here, and you could have 3 or 4 losses and still be a great team in this schedule. So definitely going to be a lot to see.
I agree with that for sure. I mean, Michigan was 9-3 last year.
Yep.
And if they're 9-3 this year, that's not the same team. That's not the same team. That's how widely the schedule can vary. So I got curious. I remember that Penn State had one other game that they really are gonna, it's gonna be the whiteout that they really need to get up for. It was not Ohio State. It is not Oregon. It is not Indiana. It's USC. So here's if Michigan had Penn State's schedule, then I'm probably predicting 11-1 or 12-0. They play Marshall, Temple, Buffalo, 3 G6 teams. They get Wisconsin, Northwestern, then the whiteout against USC that will kind of determine, how they come into the Michigan game. Then they get Michigan in Ann Arbor, followed by Purdue, Washington, Minnesota, Rutgers, and Maryland. So also a Big Ten schedule, but if you gave the Wolverines that schedule, then I would expect them to have no fewer or no more than 2 losses. So it's just how it goes when your conference is 18 teams, and we'll save that all the future of college football for an off-season podcast. But that is Michigan plays all 3 of the top tier Big Ten teams, including the defending national champion, and Penn State plays 0 of the top tier teams, and that's how it goes.
Well, Clint, this is the Big Ten. We count to 10 differently here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, so just to end on, there was a lot of hoopla around Michigan allowing in-stadium advertising. What are your thoughts on that, Clint?
I think it's somewhat inevitable. Again, when finally the NCAA had to relent and allow players to be compensated, every athletic department went back to the drawing board to figure out how they can create revenue. And these types of revenue streams have been kind of at the gates for a long time, and traditionalists have been fighting against it. There are certainly a lot of traditionalists in the Michigan fan base and in the department. So they've held out for a long time, but it always felt somewhat inevitable to me. And, the athletic department has been squeezing ticket holders and, visitors and families of 5 like mine who want to go to any athletic event in Ann Arbor for a long time for revenue. So putting ads in the stadium at least isn't going to cost me another dollar. So I'm okay with it, but I don't have strong feelings either way. It feels a little bit like the slow inevitable march toward increasing revenue and dumping more and more money into the sport, which is just becoming more professionalized.
Well, Clint, whenever I look at these things, I remember when I was in grade school and they were teaching us greater than and less than. And I remember my teacher putting up on the chalkboard 2 lines, and there's an alligator in the middle, and the alligator is the greater or the less sign, and the alligator was going to go wherever there was more, right? So if you're the athletic department, wherever there's a dollar sign, that's where they're going to go. That's where the alligator is always going to point. And I have long resigned myself to that, if something comes up and on one side is more money, that's where it's going to go. It doesn't mean I'm happy about it. Doesn't mean that I'm all for it. it's just the reality. Um, I remember when Michigan rolled out the mandatory seat donations, right? As I call them, right? And they had some open houses, some town meetings where people would go. And I remember an older woman standing up and saying, I'm a retired university employee. Um, I have donated to the athletic department. I have bequeathed you money in my will. How much more do you need? Okay. And I remember just thinking to myself, the answer is more. The answer is more. And it unfortunately, at least now the players are being compensated. At that time, they weren't. So you and I have talked about that we're all for the players being compensated, and this is just part of how it goes. Um, and again, it's not the worst thing in the world. Um, you do go to some stadiums where it is really obnoxious, and I do hope that I think everybody go online. We've tweeted out the picture of the ads in the end zones, and they're small and not totally in your face at this point, but it is what it is. So we just have to roll with it and you know, just kind of give in to what's inevitable, and hope that Michigan continues to do it in a way that is at least palatable. If not, if we're not going to cheer for it, at least it's not the worst thing in the world. So, um, and I'll tell you, you've seen some stadiums where they have Michigan State, where they have the little video ring all the way around the stadium that is constantly running ads. I hate that kind of stuff. Okay. And, hopefully we won't see that, but you do see it at other places. So it's kind of the deal.
Yeah, I weighing it against the shift to compensate players is still a huge net positive on the balance. So this is some of that kind of coming back on the negative side of the ledger in terms of a fan experience. But again, this is a little bit of a shoulder shrug for me.
Now, the biggest surprise of the last week for me had to be when Coach Whittingham talked about his discussions with former Michigan coaches.
Well, I know Rich Rod. Me and Rich go back for Pac-12 days, and so I've talked to Rich a little bit. Brady Hoke reached out to me. I've sat down with Lloyd Carr for about an hour. This was a couple months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, and really enjoyed that conversation. And so, yeah, I've had some interaction with past coaches, and Al Borges has been around. He was on the staff, wasn't a head coach, obviously, but was on the staff. I got a lot of respect for Al and what he does, and so I've had a chance to, and then also just people that are associated with the program, former players have been great. Love interacting with them, but just guys that have been around the program in some peripheral capacity for a lot of years.
And I have to tell you that you could have knocked me over with a feather. Okay. Um, I just leave that for people to listen to. And, I have said that it is my take that Coach Whittingham is trolling us when he says, when he kind of downplays Ohio State, the rivalry. And I don't know how anybody could talk to Rich Rod and not take away that you can't appreciate the traditions that Michigan fans hold dear. So I thought that was an interesting quote. And again, volunteered by him, right? He did not, he led with that. Like when he had the question, he could have talked about a lot of coaches. And so I'll just leave that there and for people's consideration.
Yeah, I I think in coach speak, you would say you want to be able to learn from everybody, and certainly there are a lot of lessons to learn from that era of the Michigan program and that coaching tenure. And I think Kyle Whittingham is wise to learn from that book of lessons for sure.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with
Clint Derringer,
Go Blue.
go blue.
But I love, running the ball down someone's throat, 14, 15, 16 plays and hammer it in the end zone. But I also love, a great receiver getting behind the defense and, getting a long distance touchdown as well.
Thank you for listening to the UMGoBlue.com podcast. All rights reserved.